This ProComp ES9000 series front shock is for those of you that have a 2007 to 2018 JK with 0 to 2 inches of lift on it that are looking for an affordable shock. This is going to be a style of shock that you're going to see from a few different manufacturers. This is a twin tube nitrogen charged shock, and it is going to be a nice affordable option if you are looking to replace your existing shocks. This is going to be a nice easy 1 out of 3 wrench installation. The only difficult part about installing a new shock is if you have some rust on your old shocks, breaking that hardware loose, but we'll talk more about the installation for this in just a second. This is going to be a twin tube shock, which means there is sort of an inner reservoir and then an outer reservoir, and the outer reservoir is where the fluid is able to go as the piston travels in. This is a nitrogen charged shock, and the nitrogen charge inside the shock is there to eliminate any foaming and cavitation that can happen within the shock fluid, the shock oil, as you work the shock very hard in, say, a high-speed off-road situation where you're hitting a lot of washboards. So with the nitrogen charge here, you're going to get a little bit less shock fade than you would if this were a hydraulic shock. And you can always tell a nitrogen charged shock when it comes out of the box because it has this banding on it. If the banding wasn't there, the nitrogen charge would force the shock to its full expanded length. Now, any sort of twin tube shock is going to have a slightly smaller piston size than, say, a monotube shock. So the maximum amount of damping that you can get out of the shock is going to be a little bit limited just because it has a little bit of a smaller piston. If you're looking for something that can do a little bit more for you, maybe you want to take a look at a monotube shock that will have a larger piston, or you can take a look at a monotube that has a reservoir if you're looking for even longer travel or even additional valving options or adjustability. This is going to be something that is set valving, designed to be a pretty comfortable ride for a certain weight range, which is why they pair this to the JK. Again, this is going to have the length that is pretty well set up for a Jeep that has 0 to 2 inches of lift on it. But if you do want to do a little bit more customization as far as the length of your shock, you can take some measurements off of your particular Jeep with whatever lift it may have on it and size your shocks that way. This shock will run you $45. I think that's a fair price for what you're getting here. It's going to be a good OE style replacement shock that's going to do what it's designed to do. Now we'll have a member of the install team show you how you get this installed.
Now for ease of access, you're going to want to remove your tire. If you're doing this at home, it is not a necessary step if you do have a jack and jack stand. Now that we have our tire off, we're going to go ahead and remove our shock. As you can see, our shock is aftermarket, but they do have issues. They do blow out, they do break, so we're going to be replacing ours. The first thing you're going to want to do is remove the bottom of the shock from the bracket using an 18mm wrench and an 18mm socket. Now before you tap out your bolt using a hammer, you're going to want to support your axle with either a jack stand or in our case, a pole jack. Now that we have our bottom nut and bolt off, we're going to move up to the top. Now to do that, you are going to have to support the top of your shock with a pair of pliers or potentially an Allen key depending on what kind of style shock you have, and use your wrench to take it off. Now once your shock drops away from the shock tower, you can actually go ahead and put your closed end of the wrench on top of the nut and spin the shock to remove it. Once you get your nut off, you're going to go ahead and grab the bushing and washer from the top of the shock tower and pull your shock away from the vehicle. Now that our old shock is out of the way, we're going to go ahead and install our new shock. Now to do this, you're just going to do it in the reverse order you took your factory shock or aftermarket off. Once you have everything on, you're going to go ahead and tighten it down using a 14mm wrench. Once you have your top tightened up and torqued, you're gonna move on to the bottom. Now, the first thing you're gonna wanna do is put your metal sleeve through the eyelet. Once you have your metal sleeve and your eyelet, you're gonna go ahead and raise your axle up until the eyelet meets the bracket. Now that we have our eyelet lined up with our bracket, we're gonna go ahead and put the factory bolt we removed earlier back through the hole. You're gonna be doing this from the back side out. Now that you have your bolt all the way through the bottom of your shock, you're gonna go ahead and put the nut on and tighten it down. And with everything tightened up, that wraps up our review and install. Now, all you gotta remember is to put your tire on, torque your lug nuts, and you're good to go. For more videos like this, check us out at ExtremeTerrain.com.